everyone, welcome to ONYX Pages. Welcome back for those of you who are subscribed to this channel, and thank you very much for subscribing. I'm Nnedi, and today is the 6th day of Kwanzaa, and the principle for this day is Nia, lies, all lies. The principle for this day is Kuumba, which is creativity. And I've got my Kwanzaa card here. Let's see if you can, there we go. My Kwanzaa card, 3 lovely ladies, 3 lovely women. I don't really like the term ladies. Dancing. Yeah. And the traditional, for those of you who aren't aware, Kwanzaa is an African American celebration. I believe it started in the 60s or 70s. I'm a practitioner of Kwanzaa. However, my practice is queer Kwanzaa because the traditional practice of Kwanzaa actually sort of harkens back to traditional Africa, which I find has been presented in very heterosexist ways. So my practice of Kwanzaa is one that is inclusive and that comes from the traditions of LGBT African communities that practice the celebration. So it runs from the 26th of December to the 1st of January. And this day is Kumba, creativity, to leave our community more beneficial and beautiful than we inherited it. And I think that that's a really beautiful principle, and this is why I chose to do my Kwanzaa challenge on this particular day, because the books that I'm going to be talking about as part of the Kwanzaa reading challenge all represent the different qualities of the different principles in Kwanzaa, but they also all speak to this contribution that is made by artists, in this case writers. So I've got 7 books here, actually 8 books here, and I'm going to go through each of the 7 principles of Kwanzaa, and I'll tell you why I've selected the book that I've selected for each of the principles. I will be referring to my card because I get nervous when I talk to you guys, so I'm gonna read each principle. Okay, let's start. So the first principle of Kwanzaa is Umoja, unity, that's celebrated on December 26th, and the principle is to strive for and maintain unity in the family, community, nation, and race. And so for that, I have chosen the book that I'm currently reading. There we go. The book that I'm currently reading, which is the graphic novel edition of Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. Kindred tells the story of a Black woman named Dana. She is married to her husband, Kevin. They live in California, set in 1976. And one day, Dana realizes that she has been pulled back in time to the 1700s in Maryland, where she soon figures out that she is has this sort of astral projection, time lapse relationship with one of her ancestors, who's a white boy who grows up to be a man in the book, named Rufus, who ends up being her, I think, great-great-grandfather. And so the story talks about her travels back and forth between 1976 California and the 1800s in Maryland, and why she goes there, what she's set to accomplish, the impact that it has on her, and the impact that it has on her relationship with her husband. And so there's so much. That's the main plot of Kindred. I recently read an article in a book called Strange Matings, where there was a queer theory analysis of the story Kindred, and I believe what I'm trying to remember what the premise was of that, and I don't actually remember it, but it was a really interesting article that I have now since forgotten. But I will link in the description box the page number of the essay that I'm referring to, and I'll also describe what the point the author was trying to make about how Kindred, even though it engages a heterosexual couple, is actually a very interesting story about queer identities. One of the interesting things that happens in this book is that because she wears pants and shirts all the time, Dana does, when she goes back in time, she's constantly being asked, like, why she's wearing men's clothes and why she speaks the way she does. Why does she speak with such authority? Why does she speak with such confidence? Why does she have so much education? Because the people in the 1700s and the 1800s weren't allowed to do the things that she could do. And so there's a really interesting conversation about rights that happens as part of this narrative. So I've chosen this book to represent unity because through Dana's traveling back and forth in time and having to encounter various forms of racism, classism, and sexism in the 1970s and also in the 1700s and 1800s, she has to figure out how to reconcile the African and European parts of her heritage, and she has to reconcile that in a very sort of interpersonal way, but also in a deeply personal way. She has to figure out what her limits are in terms of her beliefs, of her rights to humanity as a Black woman. This is a really great, the story Kindred is a great book. The graphic novel version of it, I have mixed feelings about, but I'm enjoying, it's a rich experience to read this. So I will be posting a review of this later. So that's the first book for the first principle, which is Ujima. Umoja. Sorry. Okay. The second principle of Kwanzaa is Kujichagulia, which is self-determination, and it's celebrated on December 27th. And the principle here is to create, name, and define our lives for ourselves instead of allowing it to be done for us by others. And when I thought about that principle a few moments ago, I was thinking, okay, what did I read in 2017 that tells a story of somebody who had to be self-determined, who had to define herself for herself against the opinions and against the denial of others to be able to do that. And I thought of Binti, the Binti books. So this is the first Binti, which is just called Binti, and then this is the second Binti book, which is called Binti Home, both of which I read with Pretty Brown Eye Reader. These are novellas. They're Afrofuturistic novellas written by Nnedi Okorafor, who is a Nigerian-American writer of fiction. And these, so the Binti trilogy, the third book is going to be coming out this year, and it's called Binti the Night Masquerade. But this trilogy follows Binti. Binti is, I believe, a teenager of the Himba tribe, and she is living in a futuristic Africa, and she decides in the first book, Binti, that she's going to go away to study at this university against the will of her parents and her community, because as a girl, that's not something that she's supposed to do. So she's made this decision. She effectively runs away from home. And the story, so Binti talks about that what happens to her on the way to the university, and then Binti Home is a story about what happens to her when she returns home, wherever home is. And Binti as a character is a very self-determined young woman. She definitely has to think about what it means for her to be who she is, and her identity changes against her will in the first book, and she, in the second book, has to deal with what that change means to her and how she negotiates her identity in light of something traumatic that has happened to her. And so I thought that it was a great book to associate with the second principle of Kwanzaa. The third one is Ujima, collective work and responsibility, and that principle is celebrated on December 28th. And the principle is explained as follows: to build and maintain our community while working with others to solve our problems. I'm very much attracted to this idea of working as a collective, working as a group, sharing leadership. I think that it's something that is difficult to do. It's easier to describe, but harder to do in practice. And so what I chose to represent this principle is the Lightspeed People of Color Destroy Science Fiction edition. I'm not finished reading this compilation of short stories and flash fiction. It's a pretty lengthy collection. It has 450 pages, and it's edited by Nalo Hopkinson, who you know I love, she's great, and Kristine Muslim. And the coming together of this anthology is what I associate with collective work and responsibility. So there are several parts to it. There's a section on original short fiction, original flash fiction, reprint fiction, novel excerpts, author spotlights, nonfiction, personal essays, and then miscellaneous. And each of these, each of the parts of the Lightspeed magazine was put together by either an individual editor or an editor or editors working in pairs. And this volume coming together is an example of collective work and responsibility, but all of these authors have written short pieces of work that are designed to get us to think about the role and the importance of futures where African peoples and people of color, indigenous peoples are imagined. One of the reasons why I find Afrofuturism so interesting is because when I was growing up and I watched things like Star Trek, I'm not really into Star Wars, but any of the earlier programs that had people in space, I noticed that those people didn't look like me. And as an adult, looking back on those times, I'm thinking, well, if there's so many people of color, African people, indigenous people in the world now, but in 50 years, every single movie has a very obvious absence of these people, where did we go? Like, where did we go in 50, 100, 200 years? Where did we go? If indigenous people are the fastest growing population in Canada, then why do the science fiction movies that come out of Canada have no indigenous individuals? Like, what's being planned? What's happening? And so the Lightspeed issue just kind of gets us to think about that and think about alternative futures coming out of the minds of Black, Indigenous people and people of color. So that's collective work and responsibility. All right. So December 29th, the principle for that day is Ujamaa Cooperative Economics, to build and maintain our own stores, shops, and other businesses, and to profit from them together. So for this principle, I've chosen the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. And the reason I chose this book is not because it has anything to do with cooperative economics in the monetary sense, but because this world is organized in a caste system. And so each of the castes are responsible for different kinds of things, and there's an exchange that happens between the individuals. And what I like about this is that as the season continues, and the season is, and I've talked about this in other videos, in this world, the actual season is a time where there's been some sort of cataclysmic environmental catastrophe that has resulted in people having to reduce to their sort of base instincts in order to survive against really difficult environmental conditions. And the caste system sets people up in a particular order so that each of the different castes can contribute a particular kind of skill so that the greatest number of people can survive, in theory. So there's an exchange, there's a community that exchanges certain knowledge skills, certain physical skills, certain spiritual and magical skills so that the greatest number of people can survive. And there are also communities that raid other communities in order to survive. And so there's an interesting an economic setup that I think is different from a setup that's specifically organized around money. So that's the cooperative economics. Nia purpose, so that's December 30th, that was yesterday, to make our collective vocation the building and developing of our community. So for that, I've chosen Akata Witch by Nnedi Okorafor. In Akata Witch, we follow Sunny, who is a teenager who finds out that she actually has a number of magical skills. And in this world, the magic that Nnedi Okorafor has created is interestingly connected to disability. So all of the young people who have magical skills, their magical skills are very specific to their unique abilities and their unique exceptionalities. So Sunny is albino, and her magical skill and magical personality are very much connected to the fact that she's albino. There are other characters who have qualities that would be described as disabilities or learning disabilities or personality disorders, and each of those exceptionalities are actually the source of their magical skill and the source of their contribution. And I think that from an anti-ableism, anti-oppression perspective, it's amazing to see a book like this set in a futuristic, magical Africa, where actually it might not be futuristic. I think it might be actually close to present day, where you've got what's typically known as disability to be the source of power. And in order to activate your magic, you need to really think, these kids need to think about their purpose. And so I really appreciate Akata Witch for that. Then we've got Kuumba, which is today, and the principle for today is creativity, which is to leave our community more beneficial and more beautiful than we inherited it. And I think that that is just a gorgeous thing. I mean, for those of you who have moved around a lot, you know, I have in the last decade of my life, I've moved around a lot. Also doing laundry. It's to think about, you know, what are you contributing to your community, and is your community better off because you're in it, or are you taking away from your community, or are you leaving it neutral? So Kuumba creativity talks about the contribution. Kuumba talks about the contributions that creativity can make to a community. And The Summer That We Got Free by Mia McKenzie is just a spectacular book. It's the author is she's the founder of Black Girl Dangerous, which is a blog and a website, and I think a channel. And this here we follow Ava Delaney. She's an artist, and we follow her family. There's a lot of intergenerational trauma that her family is dealing with, and layered on top of that intergenerational trauma is a coming out story. Layered on top of that is a story about religion and about the cohesion and the lack of cohesion that churches can bring to communities. There's just a lot going on. There's a lot going on in this book, but one of the most beautiful things that's going on is that art becomes a kind of magic. And so The Summer We Got Free is just an amazing example of Kuumba. And then the final, my dryer's gonna go off again. The final principle is Imani Faith, which is tomorrow, January 1st, 2018, the new year. And that principle is to believe in our people, teachers, and leaders, and the virtue and victory of our struggle. So I'm thinking about Imani. I typically think about it in terms of like faith, like religion and spirituality. I think about it in that way, but for now I'm gonna stick to the belief in our people, teachers, leaders, and the victory of our struggle. And I just finished reading this book, which is the Prey of Gods by Nikki Drayden. It's a buddy read with Maya of Maya Reads, and there are a number of different examples of leadership. There's like a traditional political leader. There's a leader in the pantheon of gods. There's a young person who is potentially destined to be a leader. There is a demigoddess who seeks a particular kind of leadership. There's an entertainer who is considered to be a leader because she's popular. And there's a drug dealer who is a leader of illicit business activities. And so there's a number of different leaders here, a number of different styles of leadership. And the theme of faith gets woven through, because in this particular world, a god becomes more powerful the more people believe in that god. And it's actually the power that she generates is a physical sensation of elation and intoxication that comes from being worshipped. And so there's been a lot going on in our communities about the responsibilities of leadership. and what it means to have people who believe in you and people who give you resources in order to lead in different ways, whether it's politically, whether it's in the entertainment industry, the sports industry, the legal profession, whatnot. And that's a lot of responsibility. And I think that in order to earn that, the title of a leader, you have to be trustworthy, and you need to, you know, admit to your mistakes and to grow and to be accountable and responsible. And so this book talks about the different ways that we can and can't and are and aren't responsible for the power that we get through the leadership that we exercise. Okay. So that is it. Those are the 7 principles of Kwanzaa and the books that are associated with it. Thank you very much to everybody who participated in the Kwanzaa reading challenge. It was my first year putting it together, and I had the opportunity to work with some wonderful folks. Everybody who has uploaded a video associated with the challenge, I will put a link to their video in the description box below, and I will be doing this challenge again in 2018. So I hope that you do participate. I'm also going to be uploading this video to my Facebook page, so I'd like to thank anybody from the Facebook world and not the YouTube world, so my family and friends and community members and colleagues who are watching this. Thanks very much for watching this video. That's the dryer. Thanks for watching the video. Happy Kwanzaa for those of you who are celebrating, and Happy New Year. I hope that 2018 is fabulous for you. Okay, thanks a lot for watching. Bye.